apologies that I can't be there in person. Unfortunately, owing to this coronavirus lockdown and restrictions, it's very difficult. But I can tell you I very much enjoyed my previous visits to China, and I look forward to coming back this year. Now, I think it's important to state, what it is that we're trying to do at the Web3 Foundation and also Parity Technologies, which is the main developer of Polkadot, overall with Polkadot and some of the other projects that we're working on. Basically, we believe in a free and decentralized internet. We believe this is very important for the world to have. We believe in low or zero barriers to entry into innovation. In this vision of the internet, this free, decentralized internet, it's important that users control their own data, their own identity, and in some sense their own sovereignty and destiny. And this has always been our mission. And for that matter, for me personally, it's always been my mission since the very beginning. So Polkadot is I would say, the next generation of blockchain technology. It brings to the table a number of features that haven't yet been found together in blockchain. Just as Ethereum offered a fairly substantial step up from Bitcoin, bringing in features like shorter block time, using an improved work mechanism that was resistant to hardware optimizations, bringing in, of course, the much more sophisticated scripting language, which at the time was, back in the early days, was believed script. Of course, that was renamed that to the EVM, the Ethereum Virtual Machine, and this facilitates all sorts of more interesting and sophisticated smart contracts to be developed and deployed in Ethereum. And there are a few other sort of important changes with Ethereum as well. Polkadot is the next step in evolution, bringing a greater level of abstraction and generalization in terms of its underlying technology, and also bringing innovations, really key innovations, in terms of future-proofing gradability and managing how the chain will evolve over time. This is something I want to get to a little later in this talk, because I think it's very important. A very important change. And in addition to this, Polkadot brings a whole new consensus mechanism, NPOS nominated proof of stake, which again is a sort of step change from so initially I want to talk about Substrate, because Substrate is both underneath Polkadot and on top of Polkadot. It's a very interesting kind of sandwich system that we have here. So Substrate, what is it? It's a modular blockchain framework. So it's a framework, it's a programming framework, as well as it comes with various tooling, various support infrastructures, tutorials, videos, seminars, documentation, and so forth, designed in order to allow you to build blockchains. They're blockchains that may have actually nothing to do with Polkadot. Right? Substrate is first and foremost a framework for building blockchains. And these blockchains can be completely independent, much like Polkadot relay chain, but they sort of sit on their own and facilitate particular tasks. Now the great thing about Substrate is that because it's modular, you're able to do accomplish an awful lot of different things that otherwise would be very difficult by basically creating new modules and plugging them together in a very sophisticated environment that will allow you to combine and compose these different pieces of functionality very effectively. Substrate's written in Rust, and is written in such a way to ensure that it is fast, but also safe, secure, and relatively easy and joyful to illegal things. And this is important because not every blockchain is suited to every piece of utility. We're generally stuck between having to make design decisions with blockchains. And often, like in the case of Ethereum, we're designing blockchains in general, but that makes it very costly and ineffective compared to having a normal, domain-specific, a normally written blockchain that would achieve otherwise the same things. Essentially, having a general purpose blockchain causes a huge amount of cost, even if it does make lots of different things possible. Now, the advantage of having a general purpose blockchain, of course, is that you can compose compose a solution from many different fragments, smaller solutions. You can bring different smart contracts together with their individual communities and create a composite solution. But, as I say, it is very costly in terms of making it general purpose. It's just by the technological design the trade-off between generality and optimality. Substrate removes this problematic trade-off by allowing you to have both very specialized blockchains that do a particular job very effectively, very performantly, very cheaply, but also allowing these different solutions to be composed, which essentially means that these blockchains have a very cheap and fast way of communicating with each other without the need to trust any separate third parties. So who's using Substrate? There are a number of developer teams using Substrate already, and I'm told by my adoption team that this sits in 3 figures. It's a very large amount of teams, very large amount of projects being developed for all sorts of uses, from enterprise chains all the way to hobbyist programmers in their bedroom making the next Facebook. So let's talk a little about Kusama. Kusama is very similar in terms of its technical base to Polkadot. They're based on 95% of the same code. Kusama has a few different little bits, or it sort of has a few extra modules, or they're configured in a different way. But largely, it's the same technology as Polkadot. Kusama is not going away now that Polkadot is launched. It never was. Kusama was always there as a long-term network to sit alongside Polkadot and try and test these new experiments for the kinds of technologies, the kinds of projects and products that we want to potentially eventually move on to Polkadot, at least to understand better how they work when we have real value sitting in the room. Real people using them for sort of real life needs. Now, one of the repercussions of this is that it will integrate new technology potentially, but while it's still risky, before it's necessarily 100% ready for production, before it's probably being audited, and this means that Kusama will live on the wild side. It will be very much a cutting, bleeding edge network, the latest technologies. We cannot promise that it won't fail. We can only demonstrate our dedication to ensuring that if it does, we will do our best to get it back from it. So Substrate Kusama, I hope I've sort of been clear. These are tools or building blocks for Polkadot. Substrate is the framework on which Polkadot is built. Kusama is our means, or one of our means, of ensuring that what we deploy to Polkadot is safe, reliable, secure, and robust. So we launched Polkadot in May of this year, 2020, and really it's the first of its kind. It's even the first of its kind, not sort of to be deployed, but the first of its kind really to be even considered. It's a heterogeneous multi-chain. Now what does this mean? It means it's a sharded network, and a network of multiple blockchains, all sitting under the same co-secured umbrella, the same validator set. Now this is a sharded network, that's what we mean by that, but it's also a heterogeneous sharded network. What does this mean? Well, it means that each of the shards can themselves be highly customized so that they're very performant at doing particular tasks. This is substantially more of a sophisticated design than your standard homogeneous sharded network that are being developed by some other blockchains. In principle, Polkadot could also be homogeneous. All we need to do is make the shards all be the same kind of shard. But we chose to make it heterogeneous to facilitate all sorts of new domain-specific use cases that would otherwise be very difficult, or would again hit that trade-off that I mentioned earlier between general purpose and performance. Well, we want both, and we can get both by having the shards themselves be special purpose, but all operating under the same umbrella. Now, it's also the first of its kind in terms of being a blockchain with true agency. What do we mean by agency? Essentially, this is a combination of governability by its stakeholders and upgradability, the ability to change itself in arbitrary ways into the future. And this means that the blockchain can be said to become an economic actor in and of itself, able, in some sense, by use of its shareholders and the algorithms that drive them and bind them together, to create its own decisions about where it will go and what it will do. So, what do we want to deliver with Summit and Polkadot? Well, there are, in a word, what we're looking for is to make a platform for innovation that allows us to innovate fast, but also have lots of teams, lots of projects, lots of utility existing under the same economic umbrella. Now, we can look upon this in a few ways. One of them is, well, we want additional scalability. We want to pass through more transactions, do more stuff, do more work under the same economic umbrella. This is basically what we mean by scalability. This comes in a few other forms, like we can describe scalability in terms of shared security. It's no good being scalable if you can't do everything under the same economic umbrella, because otherwise you're fighting over the capital and the validators that belie the security of your individual networks. And this allows us to have parallelized transactions whose effects can eventually be felt in a fast and a cheap way amongst the different shards of the different chains. And that's what really gives us the scalability. Now, Polkadot can process probably around 100, this is the target that we're aiming for, 100 parachains, all at the same time, right? So these 100 parachains exist, executing transactions, all at the same time as each other. Now these parachains on our initial benchmarks can probably execute around 1,000 transactions per second, depending on the type of transaction. Obviously, the simpler transactions, it might be even higher than 1,000 transactions per second. If they're more complex transactions, then it's going to be more. But around 1,000 transactions per second is the amount, in terms of computation, that substrate, or specifically the substrate that will run parachains, can process. But we also have 100 different parachains operating at the same time, under the same security umbrella of Polkadot. So if we multiply this 100 by 1,000 to give us our sort of grand total, around 100,000 transactions per second is what we are reasonably confident Polkadot can deliver once the parachains are scaled up. So we can compare these kinds of numbers to what happens at the moment, and we see Bitcoin processing somewhere between 3 and 7 transactions per second. Ethereum maybe around 15 to 25, again depending on the type of transactions and how busy the network is. In this way, it's pretty clear to see that Polkadot gives you this level of generality, but also performance that dramatically outperforms existing systems. and yet still is fully decentralized, allowing applications to be deployed on it that are truly unstoppable. So what are parachains when we talk about parachains? Parachains are essentially these kinds of shards that Polkadot has. They can be very specific for the domain that you're meant to execute. You could have a shard that is very good at payments. You could have a shard that is general purpose and can be smart contracts. You could have a shard that's very good at doing registration or licensing. You could have a shard that handles governance. So now these parachains are all secured by the same validator sets with the same security provisions as the relay chain, the Polkadot network. They can also connect with external chains by bridges, and Polkadot is uniquely able to support bridges by virtue of this very specialized means of creating and deploying parachains, packets of functionality that don't need to be deployed in an expensive, generic smart contract environment. Now these interactions the parachains have are all processed in parallel. The parachains exist in their own special individual execution environment. But at the end of the block, messages are passed between the parachains through the mechanism and security of the relay chain, guaranteeing that messages sent by the parachain will definitely arrive at the destination. Now, because these transactions, because the parachains exist in isolation with each other, but are executed in parallel, we can scale up the number of transactions because each parachain can execute transactions at the same time as all parachains. And because the parachains are not generic, because they're not homogeneous, but they're heterogeneous, they're able to process their own kinds of transactions very fast, much faster than if they were all smart contract shards. Then this means that one parachain can process its kinds of transactions very quickly, but then send messages as needed to other parachains which can process their kinds of transactions independently, much faster, much speedier. So the Polkadot ecosystem in China is growing rapidly. It's quite amazing to see how many teams are really taken to using Substrate and really developing these solutions from bridges and DeFi to tooling, infrastructure, websites, and so forth. The projects that we've been watching, that we have our eye on, that we think are really sort of pushing the envelope out there, to name a few: Akala, Vanker, Bifrost, Chainx, Trust, Darwinia, Hashguard, MathWallet, Fala, and Staffy. These are some really great teams out there, and it's so heartening to see such great work being done on the platform that we've been pouring so much of our heart and soul into in the past 3 years. So how do we intend to support future expansion in China? Well, this month we launched a 6-month bootcamp in Shanghai to accelerate blockchain projects in the ecosystem. The first cohort passing through this bootcamp graduated this week. This has been a collaboration between a number of parties: the Web3 Foundation, of course, Parity, and Wanxiang Blockchain Labs, which we were very grateful for their support. And 15 different teams were trained in various aspects that we think will lead them to success, including Substrate architecture, product design, legal and accounting, and investor development. Now, we're excited to host the first Web3 forum taking place in Shanghai later this week, with the goal being to really promote a well-functioning, user-friendly Web3 platform, the next generation of the internet, where we can all develop and deploy applications in a really low or zero barrier environment. So this really is blockchain unbounded. Thank you for listening and enjoy the conversation.